And now I would like to introduce our speaker today. Her name is Charlotte Fox Weber, and she's a psychotherapist and writer. She co-founded Examined Life and was the founding head of the School of Psychotherapy. She grew up in Connecticut and then moved to Paris and now lives in London with her husband and 2 children. Psychotherapy helps you have insight about your life. Charlotte Fox Weber has always been fascinated about our desires. What makes you come alive? What motivates you? Weber shares these wisdoms about inner peace, mental resilience, and growth in her book, Tell Me What You Want, which received great reviews from Kirkus and Booklist, which are our basic reviews here in the States. And now I would like to also just mention one other thing. While I was talking to Charlotte, we had discussed what she was probably going to do. And one of the things she enjoys doing is reading some of her book. But I guess 2 weeks ago, maybe, she came down with a shingles, and it has settled in her eye. And she has, let's say, very limited vision in her eye. And so it's very difficult for her to read. So she's going to do some reading if she can. It's up to her what she's comfortable with. I'm leaving it all in your hands, Charlotte, because there's no way I want to discuss it. So after Charlotte does her presentation, anyone who has any questions, please put it in the chat function. And I also want to thank Simon & Schuster, which is her publisher, for putting this together for the Chappaqua Library. So now please welcome Charlotte Weber, Fox Weber.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for adding the fox. It always feels important, but it just adds something piquant. I feel like that was already such an interesting beginning for our conversation. We jumped right in and instantly connected and were honest. And even contemplating what I should do about my vision loss, I found myself wanting to pretend everything is fine, to read, and then my eye would begin skipping. I won't bore people with my health details, but we do a lot of pretending, and my book is really about pretending in some ways, and what it is to admit what we really want to ourselves, to other people. We're always presenting and revealing and concealing different sides. So I think it's worth considering, just as we begin our discussion. I firstly love it when people jump in with questions, and love it when people feel engaged. And I want everyone to think about these issues personally, and I don't want to just lecture or talk at an audience ever. Maybe with my family, but that's different. Think about desires, and the desires that you show and the desires that you hide. And think about the last time you faked something, either pretending to want something that you didn't, or pretending not to want something you did. It could be something sexual, something materialistic, power, something that might make you seem greedy. There's so many ways we pretend and hide and avoid what we really want, and then act out in other ways. So I think, to begin with, if you look at a child playing hide and seek, there's something remarkably straightforward about the game, because it's obviously hiding and revealing and concealing. And that kind of honest trickery is the privilege of a child, where we know the rules of the game and we can enjoy. I mean, it begins with peekaboo and then moves on to hide and seek. The two games are really connected, because it's kind of showing and then ducking away and having control and masking a part but showing another part. And when you think about a child playing hide and seek, it's incredibly exciting to hide and to feel kind of safely hidden. and pick a really good hiding spot. And it's also an incredible relief to be found. I have seen children when they're unfound, when they're ignored, when they hide so well that no one comes to find them. And going the other way, it's actually quite kind of frustrating and terrifying to look for someone hiding and not be able to find them. At a certain point, enough is enough, and it can be overwhelming. I think we play hide and seek throughout life when it comes to our desires, and we play games without realizing it and hide desires from ourselves and from other people, and maybe want to be found out, but often no one comes to find us. And it can be a life of quiet desperation and feeling misunderstood, feeling blocked, feeling ignored. And I think it happens for all of us in different ways, even when we're loud and assertive about some issues. I can speak about client issues that are recurring, people I've written about, myself. I don't think that there are many exceptions for hiding something. And sometimes it's also fear that we hide, and fear of wanting something so badly that we dare not even go there in our minds. I began writing this book because of my own frustration with therapy. I first had therapy when I was 6. I'd had heart surgery as a 4.5-year-old, and I had death anxiety as a result. That is the kind of cover story anyway. And I absolutely hated being in therapy. I hated the man who I was forced to see. I felt trapped, judged, awkward, misunderstood. And he used silence in a kind of weaponizing way and pounced on anything I said and analyzed it in a way that I felt got me in trouble. And I would spend session after session just resisting and resenting and feeling stuck. My parents, who meant well, forced me to continue engaging in therapy. And I had a tantrum one day. I was about 7 at this time, and I just freaked out that I had to go to therapy to see this man. I didn't want to go. And my parents said, "You can say anything you want to him." That was their way of kind of trying to make it better for me. And I found that incredibly exciting. And when I arrived for our next session, this man came out to the waiting room to get me. And I looked up at him and I said, "Hello, pig face." And it was a very exhilarating and bizarre moment of realizing that I had an impact, because he blushed. And we never discussed that I'd called him pig face, never talked about it, but I never forgot it. And I began thinking about it in recent years. And I think it was a kind of act of rebellion, but also liberation. And in some ways, I was calling him out for being a greedy pig, for kind of wanting material from me in a way that felt invasive and not respectful. I think that all of my desires were kind of playing out in ways that I didn't begin to realize. And one of the ways that I can see now, looking back, is just resistance, defensiveness, frustration. So very often we hide our true wants by kind of going the other way and judging something or loathing something. And I think if you have had therapy experiences that were great, then congratulations. If you have had terrible therapy experiences, what is it that you really wanted from therapy that wasn't addressed? And when we look at therapy in that way, I think it applies to a lot of areas of life as a kind of microcosm for how we relate. Not that it's exact like other dynamics, but it is a little experiment for seeing how things play out. And I repeated unwittingly the dynamic I had with Pigface. I do think of him as Pigface. I repeated the Pigface dynamic in so many ways in other areas of my life, whether it was at work, friendships, frustrating romantic relationships. And I was determined to become a therapist that would be the opposite of Pigface. I wanted to open people up and liberate them and ask them about their desires. And in some ways, that is what I hope I've done. People love being invited to explore their desires, but it's often in a kind of paradoxical way. It's often when they're told not to do something or not to talk about something. If you find yourself wondering what on earth you want out of your life and nothing comes to you, and this happens a lot for people, I think consider what is most annoying you in your life, what's most troubling you, what's most terrifying. And it's through those kind of polarities that we often discover what's really going on and allow for surprise. In my book, I write about different people from all walks of life who are grappling with a desire that they're kind of struggling with and have identified to some degree, but in other ways, each character comes to realize that what they think they want is somehow different. So if you think that you want power in your workplace, what is it really about? Power over someone, power with someone? Is it about power that you're missing in your home life? If you think that you want connection with someone, is it with someone who's available and has capacity and can reciprocate? Is it, again, trying to kind of repair an earlier wound or a disconnect somewhere else? There are no right answers for how we should do these things, but very often we can struggle with issues of desire without thinking through what it's really about, and by fixating over small details without seeing the bigger picture. I found in my research that desire is often associated with sexuality and kind of libido, and there's a lot of talk about female desire and pleasure. I think that's only one part of desire. I think that we have deep longings and wants from life that are much bigger and broader. A lot goes back to sex, of course, but that are not just about sex, like wanting what we shouldn't and transgressing. Again, it can be sexualized, but it's about authority and recognition and autonomy. And there's a lot of philosophical undercurrent to our desires in ways that can be hugely enriching. When I began writing this book, I wanted to come up with solutions, and fulfillment was something I thought about a lot, like how to have a fulfilling life, how to live fully. Fulfillment is still something I think is incredibly important, but I also think it's a myth to think that we can arrive at fulfillment and just get there and be there permanently. And when you unpack desire and you pursue what you want, it can be fulfilling, but it also can be incredibly disappointing. And that is something that each character contends with, each client that I've written about. And it's the risk of pursuing anything that you want, that you might be left with loss, that you might be rejected, you might not get what you want, you might get what you want and then lose it. You might get what you want and not feel that elated and stop wanting the thing that you have. So I think that when we have an attitude of openness and flexibility about desire, we can see the bigger picture while also appreciating small details. And that may sound contradictory. I think we are contradictory, but there's something about paying attention to desire and allowing for it to happen in unlikely places. So love doesn't have to just happen in one format. I begin my book by describing the first patient I ever had as a psychotherapist when I was a young woman, and I did bedside therapy. And this woman I've called Tessa was terminally ill with pancreatic cancer. And I sat by her bed and I found her formidable and amazing. And I was immediately in awe and dazzled by her. And she spoke beautifully. She was poised. She was erudite. She was worldly. And she allowed me to be helpful, which was also incredibly exciting. She wanted to face her life at the very end. And she put it really well. She said, I want to get my house in order. She'd never had therapy before, and she'd always been suspicious of therapy. And she said, issues were what we called magazines in my day. And yet she was willing to talk about things that were hugely painful. And she did it with courage and dignity and perseverance. And she admitted things that she'd never allowed herself to talk about before, including regret. She regretted that she hadn't spent more time snuggling her two children, who were now grown up. And she longed to be with them, longed for the closeness, and it was simply too late. And sitting with her and hearing about the regret, I wanted to fix it for her. I wanted to have her arrive at fulfillment and tie her life up into a nice, pretty bow. Her children, who were now grown up, were still around, and they were on their way to visiting her in the hospital. And I was so kind of desperate hearing about her regret that I wanted to find a way to contact her sons and say, please, can you hug your mother? I mean, I wouldn't have done it, but I wanted to. And Tessa allowed for regret without thinking it was possible to make everything okay. And she said, the regret gives me hope that desire is possible and experience is possible for other people. And there was something noble about the longing in itself, just acknowledging what she wanted, even though she couldn't have it. So I think that when we contemplate our big life desires, allowing for limitation and loss and regret, kind of going straight in with a Wednesday Addams approach, embracing the dark and twisted, not thinking everything is going to be perfect, it's all going to be great, but actually admitting that things are not going to work out perfectly, and there's going to be pain and heartbreak and misery, and that's part of living a fulfilling life and taking risks and also having joy. But I think that the dark limitations are also what allow for light, fresh possibilities. So that is what I try to capture in my writing, and what I don't just try to kind of describe, but what I see in my clients just all the time in surprising ways, where people confront incredible difficulties and there's just enormous relief in kind of embracing and leaning into some of the darkness and just being honest about it emotionally, rather than trying to kind of constantly lift and push. And there can be a kind of energetic misery that comes with that. If I'm sounding too gloomy, it's oddly hopeful and encouraging when you give up on something and when you realize that something isn't possible, when you recognize a limit. And even when you recognize that a relationship is hopeless. Someone said to me once, honey, some situations are hopeless, and this situation is hopeless. And she was right. It was about a situation with someone I worked with, and I was overly committed to what was reliably going to fail. And people come to therapy every day, overly committed to what isn't working, what isn't budging. And the kind of circularity and impasse and stagnation that comes with that can be maddening. So desire is a way forward. It lights up a sense of possibility, even if it also exposes us to things going wrong. I don't want to just babble on. I want to know what people are wanting or what's coming to mind so I can respond. And please ask any questions or make any comments. I could keep going or be asked a question.
Well, I just want to just pop in there for a minute and ask, when you started talking about Tessa,
Mm.
how did you select her? How do you select any of these stories from the people that you worked with?
So Tessa was a real person, but I have fictionalized details so that I could
Okay.
write about real work, but I don't have to reveal biographical details in a way that compromises confidentiality. But I struggled with this hugely because I wanted to be true to the process and not just make it some glossy, glorified version. So everything I've written about is clinical material, but reconstituted in a way. I picked Tessa because I loved her, and she was very lovable and very open and interesting.
That's interesting. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat function. So we'll wait a minute or so. I have a whole slew of questions, so it's not like we don't have anything to talk about. Did you want to read anything? You said you were possibly thinking of reading, or is it too difficult? For
I
those of
mean,
you who came in late, uh, a while ago, um, Charlotte contracted shingles, and she's got it in her eye, and she is limited vision now, and it's difficult to do a couple of things.
reading is quite
Too
difficult at
hard.
the moment. I'm sorry. It's
Okay,
frustrating.
so does anyone have any questions? We had so many who wanted to do it in the raise hand function, but you could type it in the chat function. You just hit the chat function. All right, so here's something I loved hearing. You say desire doesn't necessarily have to be completed, fulfilled, but let me just get to it. What is one thing we can do to get to that place of peace?
Okay, great question. I think one thing we can do to get to a place of peace is, first of all, acknowledge it. And if it is so simple and so obvious, it's still worth making it explicit. So if you are in a relationship with someone who really doesn't meet your needs, what is it that you want from this relationship? Even if it isn't possible, even if you think that you've attacked him, you've criticized him, you have obsessed and overanalyzed, very often it's amazing how we haven't just gone to the simple question of what we actually want from that situation. So asking yourself, say it out loud or write it down, what you want from the relationship and what isn't possible. And I think you can honor what isn't possible. And there's something dignified and respectable about what isn't possible. So very often we discover that we want immortality or omnipotence or to kill someone. It doesn't mean that it's a good idea or that it's possible, but there's still something completely understandable and also interesting about the desire itself. And I think there's something that diffusing about just making space for it without thinking it has to be fulfilled. And letting go of the idea of enoughness. I mean, we're so obsessed with enoughness as a concept, and yet I don't think anything is ever enough. So there's a kind of strange satisfaction that can come with realizing that there will never be a total solution.
Pretty hard to take that will never be a solution.
There is no
Very
solution. No one
concept.
ever, I mean, relationships, there's no solution.
Mhm.
They
That's
can
it.
be joyous, but it's the expectation that there's some kind of miracle right way to go about it that I think gets us in a lot of trouble.
Interesting. What is the desire most people won't admit that they want?
Ooh, I think that it depends on the culture.
Oh, yeah.
I think admitting power can be very uncomfortable. I also think admitting the desire for freedom, again, really depends on the culture. It can be a startling realization that comes long after commitment to something. So there can be a lot of shame that goes along with the realization, like it feels greedy, it feels selfish when you're a mother with children and a partner and a job and responsibilities to just want freedom. And yet, of course, we all want freedom in different ways. I think that wanting attention is probably the hardest thing to say out loud past childhood.
It's interesting.
So we acted out, and we could go nuts and kind of do dramatic performances or attack or push people away. Don't make a fuss, like so many ways that we can kind of do sideshow smoke screens. But if we could actually say to partners or friends or family, I want attention, what would happen? I mean, in some cases, rejection, but that I think can be very helpful and clarifying. So kind of moving the plot forward and realizing where it won't be available. But it's very embarrassing to be called out for wanting attention.
I think you're right. Well, this conversation really opens doors. I mean, that would not be what I thought you might say.
What would you
I didn't
expect?
know. I mean, but I just didn't think. So you mentioned, oh, what is the most freeing desire?
Oh, that's a good question, because I would say it is not desire itself, because that can be very imprisoning if it gets obsessional. The most freeing desire, creativity, wanting to create, I think is just exhilarating and expansive, and it has a kind of individuality that is just so free.
When you said you have 12 universal psychological desires, and you described them in the book, how
Mm.
did you decide on them?
There were recurring themes that would come up again and again. So certain types of people would say, I want love. Like they would come to therapy wanting love. And like people in their late 20s, 30s, I'm looking for love. I'm looking for a loving relationship. And men in their 40s. And of course, love can mean many things and not just romantically, but there were also people who would come to therapy wanting help with a work issue and not wanting to talk about their desire for love. Like these kind of secrets would reveal themselves over time. But certain themes played out again and again of wanting to be cared for, wanting to leave a mark. So seeking recognition is really a thread throughout.
Yeah.
And having an impact. And I broke it into 12 different desires because I also really needed a framework and a kind of boundary for discussing desire, because I could have gone on, and you could kind of find nuanced variations of anything, and it would be endless, which I think happens when we start to have too many choices and too many
Mhm.
options. And I needed restriction and kind of railings. So I wanted to be contained in my focus so that I wouldn't just be freewheeling the way we can be when we're trying to figure out what we want from life. I think the other reason I identified the 12 desires I did is because prompting can help when people feel stuck, and kind of naming a desire invites people to get in touch with what that means. So something like creativity, I think, needs to be identified as a topic, not just for people who work in creative industries, but for anyone. And yet it's very hard to bring it up in therapy if it isn't kind of somehow normalized and brought into conversation. And people can end up waiting to be asked, waiting to kind of have something just fall into place. And with something like creativity, if you're not living creatively, it's up to you to address that and make it possible. But a little bit of provocation can really kickstart the conversation.
What I want to say right now is that everybody should understand, if they're interested in what Charlotte Fox Weber is talking about. Her book is called Tell Me What You Want: A Therapist and Her Clients Explore Our 12 Deepest Desires, published by Simon & Schuster Publishers. You can get it. But we still have more questions, and people are coming in late, which is interesting in itself. So what do you hope that people who read your book will get from it? What will they
I
take away?
I hope that there's comfort and solace in feeling less alone, knowing what really goes on in the inner lives of other people. I think sometimes kind of staring at oneself head on in therapy and journaling, it certainly has its place, but introspection and self-scrutiny can also be really difficult and limiting. And there's something about other people that can offer a kind of way into ourselves. And I hope that
That's true.
readers feel less frightened by their own minds and kind of encouraged by how twisted and dark everyone is in some way, in a way that's interesting and rich and doesn't have to be hidden away. But also, I mean, just I hope that people are excited by life and kind of even interested in moments of boredom. I think desire as a topic can wake us up.
I so much agree with you. It's saying when it by reading about other people is like a road to help explore yourself. And I think that's what a lot of people do, that, and well, that's what reading does. All the authors also, they write these books, and what makes a book really famous is when you get into that person's life, and sometimes it's a road to your own
Mm,
salvation. So
mm.
it's really wonderful. Does anyone have any questions? Please put them in the chat function. We're going to be with her for another few minutes, so we have plenty of time. And one of the last questions I want to ask, is there one of the stories that you wrote about moved you besides Tessa? You talked
I,
about, how much it was Tessa was in the beginning of the book, and that's what you felt so strongly about her. Is there anyone else? Any other story?
I felt really devastated. Well, I want to say I felt for all of them. I really do feel for most of the people I've worked with. And if I don't, then that's an indication of something missing that is worth
Okay.
addressing. And some kind of resistance on either side. I really felt for the person I wrote about who lost a lover, a famous lover, and had to kind of grieve secretly and felt utterly powerless, but also incredibly proud of this secret romance. The private hell of a kind of agonizing grief that no one knows about is so menacing and so ordinary at the same time. But we just don't know those stories. And I feel really privileged when I'm allowed to hear those stories, tell those stories. I relate to those stories. I feel for the people I write about who have lived lives pretending to be other people. I mean, we all pretend to some degree, but particularly if you're hiding from your own identity. And I was very, very upset by the story that I wrote about in the connection chapter when a woman in her 60s was brutally raped. And I think that rape happens for people of all ages in ways that we still don't know about, and it's often unreported and untalked about. And I found that just incredibly, incredibly important to include, and also unbearably painful.
I would imagine so. Is there anyone who has any other questions? I think maybe everyone's getting ready to read your book because, okay, another one. I have a friend, excuse me, who can't seem to get through to her husband. Let me just get this in a better
I can read
language.
that. How
Oh,
should I try to get through to him? I could read a sentence without my eyes going blurry.
listen, we're all feeling for you here.
Please pity me. Um, how to be heard. I mean, I think that having clarity about what it is that she wants to say to her husband, what she needs him to hear with concision is helpful, but also acknowledging powerlessness if she can't get through to him. I mean, there is no way to force someone to listen and get it. You can try everything. You can try shouting, shaking, persuading, seducing, but I think that having a clear message and kind of spelling out the main point, it might be worth restating it in a way that is simple and to the point. Unfortunately, there are no magic solutions for making someone get it when they don't, or getting through to someone. I mean, not reaching people is just infuriating. And I think there's so much emphasis at the moment about connection and the importance of friendships and being close. And at the same time, that's simply not reality a lot of the time. And a lot of the time we feel ignored, neglected, abandoned, disconnected. So being self-compassionate is also, I think, consoling in response to that.
Yeah. Well, I see it, the articles in the New York Times science section. They cover this topic extensively. You know, they're always having articles about what makes you happy. Years ago, we had at the library um, Santos. I can't think of her first name. She teaches at Yale University, and she teaches a course on how to be happy. And the outcome and the information she gave us was surprising. It wasn't at all what I thought it was. We did tape the program so people could look at it, but I think she's on the net now. Laura
Yeah,
Sanders, that was her name.
because it's about meaning
It was
and
very
struggle.
interesting.
It's not just kind of having gratification and
Right. It had
to-
nothing to do with money, and it had nothing
Yeah.
to do with things that I initially thought it might have had something to do with.
Mm.
So, I tell you, this is a topic that probably you could talk about in depth, but I really appreciate you talking even to us. I can't imagine how uncomfortable you are with what's going on in you.
No, it's great to talk with you, and you're so energizing.
Well, it says anyone before we sign off, and I just want to mention again, Tell Me What You Want by author Charlotte Fox Weber. It's available on your local bookstore, the big bookstores, Amazon.com. So please, if you're interested in this topic, or if you want more information, and maybe one of the stories will relate to you very strongly as what you were talking about, you know, a path for you. So, anyone else? I think it's kind of difficult for people to ask a question about this.
Yeah,
There's one other question. Is there a desire that could cause more harm than good?
I think that desires are all potentially dangerous and life enhancing. It's our behaviors and what we do with them. I don't think any desire in itself is harmful, but it can certainly feel threatening. So admitting to yourself that you are sexually attracted to someone totally inappropriate, yes, it could be destructive, but the actual desire is just human. I mean, I really like the Tennessee Williams quote that nothing human disgusts me, only unkindness.
Oh,
I
that's-
think desires, I mean, even aggressive desires of even murderous aggressive desires are understandable as desires, not as actions.
well, and here's a very last question. How is your book different from any other book written by a therapist?
I try really hard to be emotionally honest about how I am as a therapist, my missteps, not all over the place to the extent that I'm just kind of disgracing myself, but what really goes on and the issues real people bring and the kind of details of what therapists really think about and feel in sessions. So I think it's more open as an exploration of therapy and life issues.
I feel like I've been in a bit of a therapy right now, so thank you. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. I hope you all learned something, and everybody in the audience, and a food for thought, at least something to take home and think about. So I'm going to end this session unless I find another question by anybody. I guess not. It is difficult. I think I mentioned in the beginning, I don't know if people would ask questions. So it's a difficult kind of thing.
No one should ever be forced.
Right. So thank you again. Thank you all for coming to this program. And I hope you feel better soon. And
Thank you very much.
and I'm sorry we couldn't hear some of the words in the book, but we certainly understand why.
Thank
So
you.
thank everybody for coming, and please go to our website. This program was recorded so you could share it with your friends. It will probably be edited within the next few days and up on our website, which is chappaqua.library.org. They could always get it. We do very well on our recorded program, so please tell your friends about it and they could watch the entire program. Again, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you, Simon & Schuster Publishers, for this program.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everyone.